Well, thank you all very much. As she mentioned, I'm Mark Davis, Stan Davis's son. I'm joined by my mother, Lori, and my sister, Lynn. And we're really proud here to be able to share a little bit of time with you and celebrate my father's career in this profession. Dad was a man of many interests, and I suspect we'll see some of that on the slideshow. He was really well known as a musician back in Maryland, and was frequently out entertaining with a number of other musicians, and well known for his piano playing. And he had an amazing memory for songs. So he passed that legacy on to his children and his grandchildren, and they're all musicians as well. So I don't know if you just want to run through that. So my father really, he truly enjoyed the outdoors. He was a hiker, a hunter, a sailor, and he told me that one of the things he really enjoyed about hydraulics engineering was a chance that he got to go out and be in the field and inspect bridges and enjoy all that kind of thing. And I was thinking, as you were talking earlier, about those robotic sensors now that'll go through the culverts and detect them on their own. I think he might have freaked out about that. He'd prefer to be out there trudging through it on his own. He was always fascinated by hydraulics, and I remember as a young boy, we would drive down the road, and he would point out the car, and he would say, "Hey, look at all this riprap over here." And I'm thinking that's probably a conversation that doesn't happen in very many families, but that was my dad. He didn't often talk about his work in a great amount of detail, but we knew that Dad did a lot of work on hydraulics and scour, and he was really focused on making sure that the bridges that we crossed were safe and secure. And later in his career, he started talking to me about some of the modeling software that I think you all use now to do a lot of those hydraulics calculations and scour calculations. And he was marveled by the kind of the up and coming technology, and reflected on how far you'd travel since his early days using a slide rule. So I think an incredible transition through his career. I think finally, on behalf of my family and myself, we want to thank you for the recognition of my father here at the conference, and in turn, we also want to thank you. We know that the people in this room are really responsible for keeping us safe and keeping us connected through all the bridges and roads that make up our international or national infrastructure. So on behalf of the family, thank you as well for all you do. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jeremy Mondock. I'm with the Maryland State Highway Administration. Normally, I guess this would fall to my boss, Andy Kosicki, but he's unfortunately out of the country right now. So I know he wanted to send his regards for being unable to be here. He had a chance to work with Stan a little bit longer than I did. Andy and Stan probably worked together for about 30 years. I had the pleasure of working with Stan for about 20 years. When I first got out of college and came to State Highway, Stan kind of took me under his wing and kind of showed me a little bit about how life really worked. I think some of it was because Stan and I were both Penn Staters, both from the northwest corner of Pennsylvania. So he kind of took me under his wing and mentored me through a lot of my career, and I'm very thankful for that. He certainly taught me a lot of things that you take with you throughout your career and you don't forget. I guess a little bit back to follow up on Stan, Stan came to Maryland State Highway after he'd been at Federal Highway for a very long, distinguished career. So we were very fortunate to get an employee with so much knowledge and talent. Stan, I believe it was 1989, he came to State Highway. It was right after the 1988 Federal Highway Technical Memorandum came out, which required all states to have a scour assessment of their bridges, which occurred mainly because of the 1986 Schoharie Creek failure. So we did not have a scour program at the time, and we thought, what better person to hire than Stan? So Stan came on board in 1989, and for the first 5 or 6 years, he, along with Dr. Fred Chang, developed an assessment method for all of our bridges, which for all the bridges, which is county, state, local, everything was around 6,000. So they developed a method to be able to assess and rate all these structures, and then along with the inspectors and the remedial engineering people, went out and rated all 6,000 bridges. And we were the first state to accomplish that by 1996. After that, Stan developed a host of computer programs for us that allows us to very efficiently calculate our scour and do our scour analysis a lot quicker. The AbScour program, which was his baby and he was the chief architect of, we still use today, and it certainly is a extremely great program that it just allows us to save time and money. In development of the AbScour program, Stan and Dr. Chang were the first to propose putting the local abutment and contraction scour into a single equation, which that occurred a few years before National Research Council came to the same conclusion. Another program that Stan developed for us was our tide route program, which is a flood routing program for estimating scour and tidal waterways. He also developed our MPAD program, which was pavement and deck drainage and scupper analysis. Along the way through all of that, Stan was developing our Office of Structures H&H manual, which we still use today in its various forms, and up until his retirement, he was continually updating and adding to it and revising as policies and procedures changed. Through the early 2000s, Stan was a huge part of the Woodrow Wilson bridge replacement, where he, along with the scour team, did a whole host of methods and estimates for scour, up to and including flume tests in order to come up with a reasonable and reliable design for the foundations. He was also a huge instrumental part in developing the Maryland Hydrology Panel report, which Will Thomas was kind enough to remind me of today as we were speaking earlier. He was able to provide some review and guidance in that as well. By then, Stan had become the scour guru for all of us and everybody at State Highway. It didn't matter whether you were a state employee, a consultant, or a county person. If you had a question with scour, Stan was certainly the man to be able to help you, and he did it with a smile, and if you know Stan, usually a joke. He continued to assist and train and teach all of us up until his retirement here recently. And we as a state are where we are with our scour program because of Stan. If it wasn't for him, we'd certainly be years behind where we were. There isn't an engineer at Maryland, hydraulic engineer, that doesn't owe what they know and what their understanding is of scour thanks to Stan. We appreciate it. We always will be thankful for it. And Stan's legacy will carry on for many years to come at Maryland State Highway. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Joe Krolek, and I'm the Principal Hydraulic Engineer for the Federal Highway Administration in Washington, D.C. And when I was asked to talk about Stan Davis, something that I've said before and I'll say again now is that the Federal Highway Hydraulics Program was built on the shoulders of giants, and Stan Davis was certainly one of those gentlemen. His distinguished career, federal career, started at the Bureau of Public Roads. There was a point where there was a similar group as we are here today, the 1963 Bureau of Public Roads hydraulic engineers, and we have a bright and shining light, Stan Davis, with the other Federal Highway or Bureau of Public Road engineers. Stan moved on, and maybe my slide's not moving on, but Stan was also active in other areas as well. For example, he was one of our Federal Highway regional engineers in Albany, where he did excellent work for this portion of the United States. Stan was one of the first people to be part of what we call Demonstration Project 20, where we took a truck with a hydraulic flume around different portions of the country to demonstrate culvert and other hydraulic concepts. I was talking to Phil Thompson, who worked for Stan, and he reminded me of one incident where they were driving the flume in a truck through Boston. They saw a sign that said, "No commercial traffic." Fortunately, they were in a federal highway truck and drove onto this roadway. Unfortunately, that truck got stuck under a bridge. But Phil assures me Stan's genius was to remove some of the air out of the tires so they could continue on, and the other genius was not reporting it to Phil's boss. Stan did other things as well. He was one of the inaugural Federal Highway members of the AASHTO Technical Committee on Hydraulics and Hydrology. He was serving as a member. And there was a point where Federal Highway was pretty much dictating different methodologies for state DOTs to use. That wasn't Stan's way of doing things. He, along with technical committee members Menard Wacker from Wyoming, Charlie Whitaker from Oklahoma, and others, came up with the idea of some of the hydraulic drainage guidelines, and with the idea that the states would come up with their own procedures and own methodologies, and Federal Highway would work in a collaborative and cooperative manner. That insight and that approach informs us to this day. Stan was essentially, from 1980 to 1988, they called him the chief of the hydraulic and geotechnical branch at the headquarters of Washington, D.C. So Stan had a position that I have the honor of having now. He did many active things, some have been discussed, but near the end of his tenure it became one of the most critical and important aspects of his federal career. When in 1987 the Schoharie Bridge failed, Stan was basically in charge of the Federal Highway response and the assistance to the National Transportation Safety Board. Not only did he work there, but he also was smart enough to get Dr. Ev Richardson involved and did several things. He essentially came up with what we call the Technical Advisory 5140.20, which is called Scour at Bridges. He came up with the idea of, with a new hydraulic engineering circular number 18, Scour at Bridges. He was one of the first authors with Dr. Richardson. And he continued, as we heard from Maryland State Highway, setting a high bar on what is good understanding and practice for the Scour program. So we acknowledge and honor Stan's contributions. I'll leave this with a personal note. I started working as both a co-op and then a young junior engineer in the early 1980s. And I was doing work for folks at Federal Highway, and they said, "You know, Joe, you're going to have to come down to DC and brief the chief." I was terrified. So I went to the meeting room, got there early, my hand shaking as I'm trying to take notes to be ready for this august figure, whoever the chief may be. And there was a gentleman sitting at the table, and he says, "How do you do? I'm Stan Davis." "Hi, I'm Joe Krolak." Very friendly fella. And he goes, "You seem kind of nervous, Joe, Mr. Krolak. What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I am nervous because I'm going to meet the chief." And Stan goes, "Don't be nervous. That would be me." So Stan was always supportive to not just me, but my colleagues at Federal Highway, whether he was at Federal Highway, at Maryland State Highway, through the TRB, AFB 60 work that he did. And once again, thank you for his family for coming, and thank you all for joining me in expressing our appreciation to Stan Davis. The chair of the AFB 60 committee, Beatrice Hunt's going to join me up here.
We would just like to give you a small gift. This is Stan Davis. He's our great friend and mentor.